Welcome to Refugee from Russia podcast. I hope you're doing well. If you're new, I'm super happy to have you here. I tell stories of regular people from Russia, and today's story is a pretty wild one. Before I get into it, I have to share some disclaimers. When I talk about Russian police, I'm not attacking Russia. In fact, there are endless things about Russia that I absolutely love. For example, being given 2 years of maternity leave, along with money to buy a house as a new mom, and the job security? Yes, please. It almost feels like America hates motherhood. Because here, in America, women, when they give birth, they are expected to go back to work in about 3 months. This is literally insane. So today's story is about accountability, research, authentic sources, and official documents looking at what happened to two teenage Muslim shepherds in Russia who, till today, did not receive justice. It is a warm morning in one of the most beautiful places on earth. It is especially stunning from April to September. The sky glows faintly as dawn stretches its golden fingers over the mountains. Birds are chirping, and the call to prayer, the azan, cuts through the early morning fog like a gentle wake-up call. In cozy homes scattered across the hills, people are rubbing their eyes, one foot in front of the other, as they get ready for wudu, the ritual washing. Prayer mats are being laid out, and soft whispers of morning prayers fill the air, blending with the quiet of the land. Some head back to bed after that, while others start their day. Meanwhile, women are already baking bread, and the smell drifts through the crisp mountain air. As the sun gets brighter, it shows off this stunning place in the undergrowth. Somewhere in the distance, you can hear a donkey. A local shepherd is preparing for a trip to the city to grab supplies. The clinking of pots and shuffle of feet is just another chill morning in Dagestan. In the beautiful hills of Dagestan, the bodies of brothers Nabi and Ghassan Hussein lay face down beneath a tree, side by side. The morning sun rests on them like a blanket, as if trying to give them one last bit of comfort. Even in death, they're together, unalived, in the place they called home. The murder of the brothers took place on August 23, 2016, near the village of Gor Hindakh in the Shamilsky district of Dagestan. Actually, the village is so small that it has less than 300 people. Kids worked as shepherds. At the time of their death, they were 19 and 17 years old. A shepherd, or a chaban, that's how they're called in Dagestan, are mistaken for unintelligent and unskilled people, which is not true. A chaban has to read the weather by observing the clouds, know every trail and spring in the area, understand which plants are safe and which are dangerous, and protect the flock from predators like wolves who might sneak up on them. Oh, and they have patience for days. I would not last for more than 5 minutes as a chaban. I think I would be yelling at sheep and be like, seriously? Where are you going? Come back. And I definitely would have a panic attack because imagine little sheep running around in all directions and you have to collect them. No, thank you. I would not be able to do that. But not only kids were patient, their families meant the world for them. So much so that Ghassan, the oldest, who was known to have a gentle and calm nature, he didn't speak much, but when he did, it was very meaningful. When he finished school, he started helping his dad full-time to ease his burden. It was a no-brainer for him. Nabi, on the other hand, who was energetic and cheerful and just a restless teenager, he was like, oh, I also want to help. You're not the only one who's getting all the good deeds, okay? I want some blessings too. This is how he might have said that to the brother when he found out that he's helping him. He decides to leave the school after the 9th grade to work alongside his brother to help support the family. The 5 family members primarily lived off disability allowance, both parents were disabled, and shepherd salary, which was 59,000 rubles for about 4 to 5 months. This is approximately $767. The boys had a younger sister who they loved so very much, and they wanted her to stay in school, get good grades so that she can achieve all the dreams. On one day, August 23rd, 2016, the brothers called their mom and they say, Mama, we're very hungry. We're starving. Can you please make us some fish and the flatbreads, please? We are on our way home. She replied, smiling, Of course I can. Come home. Brothers called their mother as they finished tending livestock about 3 to 4 kilometers from their home, so roughly 3 miles. Ghassan watched over the cattle while Nabi cared for the calves. I know nothing about what it means to be a shepherd, but from my tiny experience feeding cows once, I know that you can spend a lot of time away from home and it is very taxing on you. So, when boys did not arrive that same night, the parents weren't as worried because sometimes that happens. As a shepherd, you go away for days and sometimes you don't come back immediately because, something might happen. They even had a little house in the mountains where they spent some time. I want to show you some footage of that. It's a very rare footage that I was able to find online. It has English captions. It's a documentary about this case, so I highly recommend watching it as well. But despite their work schedule, it was still weird. Where are the boys? First, Patimat, their mom, got worried. And then Israpil Magomedov, who was supposed to replace the boys, their uncle, he goes and checks up on them because he just wanted to know what's going on. He went the next day around 6 a.m. And what he saw changed him for the rest of his life. When he arrived at the scene, it was around 6 a.m. Under bushes near the road to the pasture, two bodies were laying face down, barefoot, and appeared to have been moved from the road. Bloodstains nearby had been covered with sand, and the bodies were dressed in unfamiliar jackets. Keep this in mind, please. One body had 8 gunshot wounds, while the other one had 11. Nearby, there were rifles, military boots, duffel bags, and also their sandals that they were wearing, their shepherd sandals, were tossed away. First body belonged to Ghassan, second to Nabi. When their father called to ask what happened, because the father wasn't on the scene immediately, he called his brother, one of his youngest brothers, Magomed, asked him, Magomed, what happened? Tell me. He was a bit of ambiguous, didn't say immediately what happened, and then he says, Magomed, you're my brother, right? Tell me, do I at least have one of my sons alive? His brother simply replied, come, and then hung up the phone. He immediately started sobbing. Without telling directly what happened, he knew he no longer has a single son left. I recently myself attended a funeral, and there is something about grief that feels almost out of this world. When you look in the eyes of the closest family of the deceased, it's like they're not fully there. Here, drink some water, someone says softly, trying to ground them. But it seems like the simplest things, like trying to ground them or give them water or drinking water, just doesn't register. According to Islamic tradition, it's important to bury the dead as soon as possible. Delaying the burial is seen as disrespectful and goes against the belief that the soul's journey to the afterlife should not be postponed. However, the police, who, by the way, in 99% of the time are Muslims themselves, they took the bodies, citing orders from the superiors. Nope, you guys are not getting the bodies. In fact, we're going to take them to the capital of Dagestan for further investigation. Translation? You will never see the bodies again. And also, we think that your boys are militants. So the words militants and also the sentence "you're not getting the bodies" sounded familiar in Russian, but to a grieving father, they might as well have been spoken in a language he didn't understand. The SWAT showed up in his house looking for something. The mom, Patimat, was hysterically crying. Nothing at that point made sense to the family members. You know, they say it takes a village to raise a child. And in case of Nabi and Ghassan, they were raised in a literal village where everybody knew and loved them. Their plan, the boys' plan, was to build a house, one house slightly up the hill next to the father and mom, and the other house slightly down the hill, so that whenever they wanted, they could come over for tea, eat their mom's cooking, especially their favorite meal, fish and fresh flatbread. But also, they wanted to be nearby so they can help out the family. But instead of building houses, the family is now tasked with building two graves. And there is one caveat to this. According to Russian laws, individuals accused of militant activities don't get to die like human beings. They are buried in unmarked graves. There are only a few countries in the world where that's a tradition or that's a law. So when the women of Dagestan learned that they can't bury the kids, they were like, hell no, you kidding me? There's no way that you're keeping the bodies of our babies and burying them God knows where. And yes, they are our babies because they grew up in front of us. We saw their first steps, heard their innocent laughter as they played in the neighborhood. Heck, we all dreamed that one day we will go to their weddings and see the weddings of their kids too. Not on our watch. And the woman meant business. Somewhat sporadically, women gathered at the heart of the police station where the bodies were being held. The woman literally pushed open the gates of the police station, stomped in, and carried the bodies out on stretchers. As soon as the head of the police found out that the woman had broken into the station and taken the bodies, he immediately rushed over to the station, grabbed a rifle from someone, and ordered his officers to try to take the bodies back from the woman. That didn't work. Then he started firing shots over their heads, trying to scare the woman. That didn't work either. Just imagine this picture. I get goosebumps when I'm talking about this. At that point, some men arrived. They took over carrying the stretchers and they continued. The police officers began hitting their hands with batons, trying to seize the bodies. And that also didn't work. They took the bodies and buried them. Instead of building two houses for his sons, Murtazali, his father, built them two graves that day. As tragic as the story is, as difficult as it is to talk about it, I want to offer you as objective point of view as I can. So now let's dive into the official statements, witness statements, publicly available information, interviews and articles, as well as official court documents from the European Court of Justice to figure out what the hell happened. First things first, I want to rant a little bit. On August 29, 2016, only 3 days after the murder, the president of Republic of Dagestan announced that the prosecutor is keeping the case under personal control. I'm sitting there like, what does it even mean? Isn't this already their job? It's like a firefighter showing up to a burning building and saying, don't worry, I am personally watching the fire. Okay, cool, but aren't you supposed to be putting it out? Under the phrase under personal control isn't accountability. It's just a fancy way of saying, look, I'm paying attention, okay? But without actually fixing anything. Justice doesn't need a personal babysitter. It needs a system, but I'm sorry, I digress. Official stance of the prosecution on the police officers is the following. During operational search activities in the village of Gor Hindagh and Khatib, unidentified individuals opened fire on law enforcement officers. In return, the officers fired retaliatory fires back at them, and they were neutralized. The statement led to criminal cases being initiated under Article 222 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation, which is illegal possession and carrying of weapons, and Articles 317, which is attempt on the life of law enforcement officers. These two articles were, or these two, charges were against Nabi and Ghassan. Relatives of the deceased were told that the brothers were militants and they were involved in several crimes committed in the district. The arson of a school in the village of Telati, the explosion of a television tower in the village of Khebda, and the murder of a federal judge, Magomedov, from the village of Asab in the Shamilsky district. Investigative work was carried out on the initiated cases and materials were collected. There was a genetic examination, which was supposed to prove that the brothers had fired automatic weapons, among other evidence. In total, there were about 23 volumes of materials. Also, put a pin on this. Okay, so now let's go over the victim's family position, okay? I already mentioned how the families were able to get the bodies back, but little did they know that they won't be getting justice not in 4 months after finally being able to file a petition with investigative authorities demanding the initiation of a criminal case regarding the killings. Not in 3 years after filing with the European Court of Human Rights on May 17, 2019. Not even after the court issued the final verdict. But let's take it step by step. First things first. The law enforcement mistreated the Ghassan Hussein family. They literally terrorized them. One brutal example of that would be when the official police feed released the following photo. On the photo is a policeman. In front of him is a ton of guns and ammunition. The father was the one shared this photo in a rare documentary that I mentioned about earlier in the video. It's unclear whether the guns were planted during the early hours after the tragedy because the police did enter the house and begin searches, or was it a photo staged later? In January 2017, the father of the murdered brothers filed a petition with the investigative authorities demanding the initiation of a criminal case regarding the killings. For a long time, the investigative authorities refused to open a case. Only at the end of March did the prosecutor of Dagestan acknowledge that there were no grounds to consider the murdered brothers as militants and sent the materials for further review to initiate a criminal case. And the 23 volumes of materials that I mentioned earlier, that I asked to put a pin on it, yeah, that was bullcrap. I don't know if I can say this on YouTube. I can't, right? There was no information in the 23 volumes of the names of law enforcement or the units or any details regarding the investigators. How? How do you write 23 volumes of anything, let alone a criminal case, and not have the authors of the book? So the 3 charges that we mentioned earlier, the 3 charges that the 3 brothers were had on them, remember, it was the arson at a school, it was the killing of an official, I think it was a judge, and it was also explosion of a TV station. So those charges were dropped. However, there is one eerie example of how the prosecution or the law enforcement did not care for morality or anything. To be able to cover up for why they pinned these 3 particular, very specific cases on these boys, 4 months later, other teenage kids in the area were killed. So these 3 charges were pinned on them. Till today, I don't know who those kids are. I don't know their names. There is no information online to find out who were those kids. But essentially, this was the cover-up that took place as the family of Ghassan and Nabi are fighting for justice. And by the way, this information that I just mentioned is backed by Murtazali, who is the father of the boys. Let's roll that clip so you can see it for yourself.
4 месяца вешалось это на моих сыновей. Это не раскрутили 3. И через 4 месяца убивает 2 других ребят. И автоматически моих сыновей снимается это, что на них вешалось, это снимается и перекладывает на тех ребят.
By the end of 2017, the criminal cases against the brothers were closed, and the criminal case was finally initiated under Article 105 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation, murder, with the brothers' father, Murtazali Ghassan Gusseinov, recognized as a victim. It's the first time ever in Dagestan that a murder case was opened for victims of a so-called special operation. Because initially, when they were killed, it was said that it is because of a special operation that the military or the law enforcement was conducting in that area. So now what we have is the case, the special operation case, is dropped. The victims of that case are now recognized as victims, where before that has never happened. But I wouldn't feel, I guess, hope too soon. Even this, because this hasn't happened before, it doesn't mean that we are close to changing the situation there or we're close to justice. By the end of 2017, the criminal cases against the brothers were closed, and a new criminal case was finally initiated under Article 105 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation, murder, with Murtazali, the brother's father, recognized as a victim. It is the first time ever in Dagestan that a murder case was opened for victims of so-called special operations. If you remember, in the beginning, the boys were killed as a result of a special operation because they were killed in a retaliatory fire. So that's what it's referring to. What happened in this case is unheard of. The brothers' parents protested in Makhachkala for a really, really long time, continuing to demand justice. However, the government kept rejecting their applications and rejecting their pleas to see them. And in total, it was about 57 times. One netizen puts it that the fight for justice will live on as long as the parents are alive, and that's true. Hundreds gathered for a peaceful protest in October 2018, so 2 years after the boys were killed. The fight still continues. Law enforcement surprisingly didn't interfere, and finally, the family secured a meeting with the investigative committee, and the case was escalated to the Russian federal level. I mean, they fought for 2 years, and what did they get? Nothing. The case still does not have a single suspect. After exhausting domestic remedies and facing prolonged inaction as well as inconsistencies in this investigation, finally the family files an application with the European Court of Human Rights on May 17, 2019, so 3 years after the murder. And while the court is reviewing the materials and looking into the verdict, on December 25th, Sergei Melikov, who is the new head of Dagestan, he meets with the parents, expresses his condolences, and offers them assistance. A perfect opportunity presented itself just 3 months later. The European Court finally reviewed the case and declared that Russia is guilty and violated Article 2 of the Convention, which protects the right to life in both its substantive and procedural aspects, emphasizing that Russia must take all necessary actions and all necessary measures to ensure that the case is being looked into thoroughly and that they take all the measures that they can to find who is the one who killed the boys. On top of that, the court also requires that Russia pays 120,000 in euros to cover the damages. What did Melikov do? He did absolutely nothing. He also had the audacity to say, "But to my greatest regret, the time has already been lost. Now the wound needs to be healed by all of us. We will definitely return to it." End quote. Translation? Let's just collectively move on, folks. And I'm hoping everyone forgets. Despite women storming the police station, parents protesting over 50 times, petitions being filed right, left, center, needless to say, if there isn't a single person apprehended today, justice has not been served. And in an interview, Murtazali, he did thank Melikov, the head of Dagestan, for agreeing to meet with him face to face and also for agreeing to bring the water into the village. As it turns out, the village where he's from doesn't have water at all for everybody all the time. So he asked to help with the water. I want to say something about this. While this might seem or feel like speaking to a government official, the head of the republic is a rare privilege rather than a right. In regions like Dagestan, families often settle for crumbs, when in reality, Murtazali deserved justice. Not just justice, but acknowledgement of the state's wrongdoing and also a significant reparation. Honestly, like who wants your I give you my words? Because people honestly want to find who is responsible, fix the parts of the system that cause this to happen, and prevent kids from being killed in the future. No one needs your words and your consolations. This is not the time and the place. People needed your actions. But I do still have a question. The question of why. Why were they unalived? And in the words of one of the locals who was interviewed in the same documentary I mentioned, he said, "For a long time we couldn't understand, what do shepherds have to do with politics? But honestly, it must be said that by 2016, there were hardly any militants left in the area. Those who were still around in Dagestan were mostly there due to initiative of certain security services that didn't want to lose the funding that had been falling into their laps like manna from heaven. You see," he says, "Moscow at one point gave Dagestan law enforcement almost a blank check. Do whatever you want, just solve this separatism problem for us." He also adds, this meant extraordinary powers, extraordinary conditions, and extraordinary funding. Just resolve it, regardless of the law, regardless of how it's done. And so they began to act within their own capabilities and understanding. End quote. Ghassan and Nabi were deeply loved, and the smell of cooked fish and flatbread will forever linger in their parents' memory as the meal their sons never got to finish that tragic day. In 2019, to honor their memory, a memorial stone was placed at the site of their murder in the mountains. Nearby, a water supply was installed for wudu, ritual washing, along with a small mosque offering peace and reflection to those who visit. The mosque even has coffee and tea for those who wish to stay a little longer. This connection between prayer and the mountains feels especially meaningful because during the USSR, when gathering for prayer was forbidden, the people of Dagestan would often escape to the mountains, far from watchful eyes, to practice their faith.
Не давали же молиться, скопление людей же не было, не разрешали же тогда молиться, скапливаться там. Ну вот они, старое село, вот это брошенное, никто не догадывается, что здесь молятся. Ну, каждую пятницу намаз, люди оттуда ходили сюда, как будто бы они идут на прогулку, здесь они молились.
The mountains, once a symbol of refuge and resilience, tragically become the site of unimaginable loss for the two brothers. That is it for the story, guys. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. Please spread love, stay safe, and speak up when the world needs your voice. Bye.